Good morning. Welcome back to our study of Judges. I hope that you've enjoyed our study as we begin to wind down toward the end of the book of Judges. I hope that this study has been profitable to you, that it's caused you to think about some things. I know that there's some passage in here that scholars disagree on. They may have different interpretations of this event or that event. And what I hope I've done with this study is not present to you something that you should just take at face value, but rather that you should dig into the book, that you should want to study, be motivated to look into this, to study more and to find out what this book means to you, what it says to you, because I believe with all my heart that God is speaking to each one of us individually at whatever point we are in our life. It may be at a time that you're in a time of prosperity and everything is going great. Judges can speak to you. If you're in a time of oppression, if things are not going well, if you're desperate like the people of Israel were, the book of Judges can speak to you. And I hope that our study is motivating you to look in and see what God is saying to you. And I hope that our lesson today will speak to you as well. We move into chapter 17. We come into kind of an anomaly in this book of Judges, because we're going to look at Judges 17 and 18 today and see some stories. The word judge is not used anywhere in these passages. There's no reference to anybody judging Israel. There's no reference to another judge. This is just a story that seems kind of out of place in the book. And we wonder, why is this here? What is this passage for? Well, you may remember in our introduction when we talked about the book of Judges, how it's not a book that's set in chronological order. These stories weren't made or meant to be one following another through the course of time. It's much like this week was my mother's 95th birthday, and we went to visit with her and at the assisted living facility she was at, and we were socially distant across a carport, and we were talking with her, visiting with her, and she was telling us some stories about birthdays in the past and youth, and she would go, back to very young, and then to a teenager, and then go back to one in junior high, and her stories didn't go in chronological order. That's much the way the book of Judges goes. Someone was sitting down, writing, telling stories, and this is almost oh yeah, I forgot. Let me tell you about this. And so that's what we're finding in our story today in Judges chapter 17 and 18, a reflection back in time. And we believe that most of this story takes place not long after the death of Joshua, before the time of Deborah and the other judges. So we're taking a step back in the timeline of the people of Israel. And we're going back to that time before the judges, when men did as they saw fit. We'll see in here several times they mention that there was no king in Israel, that every man did what was right according to his own eyes. And so let's step back and read this story about the man called Micah. Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it." She had 1,100 pieces of silver, or shekels of silver, which is worth almost $11,000 today. So quite a large amount of money that she was looking for. We read in the New Testament about a story that had a woman had 5 gold coins and she lost one, and how she tore her house apart looking for it. You kind of get this picture of this mother. There are 1,100 pieces of silver missing, and she's looking for it. And she's digging through the house and can't find it. And somewhere in this process of looking, she uttered a curse on whoever took that money. And evidently her son heard this, or it was relayed to him. And he comes to her, and he tells her, "This 1,100 shekels of silver that were with you, about which I heard you utter a curse, I have the silver with me. I took it." So Micah, for some reason unknown to us, goes in and he takes 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother. At some point, she becomes very upset and begins to utter a curse. And Micah hears this, or it gets relayed to him, and he decides he needs to go back and confess to his mother what he had done, that he had taken this money. And so his mother says, "The Lord bless you, my son." She uses the word Yahweh here, that we're familiar with the word Jehovah. She says, "Jehovah bless you, my son, for coming and telling me that you have taken this money." This story really reveals a lot about the character of Micah, that he would take this money from his own mother, but when he hears about the curse, he's motivated to bring it back. Evidently, Micah was very, I don't know if we'd use the word superstitious or quasi-religious in that this curse really bothered him. And it wasn't until he heard about the curse that he was motivated to bring the money back to his mother. But he does. And his mother says, "The Lord bless you." Now, she goes on to say, when he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, "I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make an image overlaid with silver, and I will give it back to you." And so she is wanting this silver that had been taken from her, that her son had stolen, if you will, and she's going to consecrate it to the Lord. She gives praise to the Lord and says, "The Lord bless you." It's possible here that she realizes that her son has taken this, has made a mistake, that she's uttered a curse. And do you remember how seriously the people of Israel took their vows? Remember the story of Jephthah and how seriously he took his vow. And so she had uttered this curse, and it's probably quite concerning to her that she had cursed her son, that she had uttered this curse on whoever took the money, and it turns out to be her son that she loved. And so she says, "Well, the Lord bless you. I'm going to dedicate this money. I'm going to consecrate my silver to the Lord. And I want you to make an image with it. I want you to make it an image of God." And so maybe she's trying to find a way to reverse the curse, if you will, or to end the curse that is on her son by using the same amount that was stolen from her to be dedicated to the Lord. But does she do it in a right manner? Does she do it correctly by authorizing the construction of this image, or an idol, if you will, that's made with the silver? And so she's trying to redeem her son. Isn't that much the way that God pursues us? That when we sin, that we're under the curse of sin. We're under the judgment of God. We know that all men have sinned and the wages of sin is death. We're under that curse of sin. But isn't what God wants to do with us? God wants to redeem us. God wants to bring us back into the fellowship with Him. And so this mother is making an effort to try to redeem her son by dedicating this money that had been stolen to the Lord. And so she authorizes him or instructs him to take this silver and to make this image. And we don't really know what the image was. It doesn't say whether it was in the shape of a bull or a man or what. But what we find throughout history and the history of Israel and of all religious nations is they try to shape images or idols in the shape of a God that they can understand. They try to define their God, to put their God in a box, to give their God a form that they can understand. And I kind of find it ironic that some of the shapes that men have put together for their idols over the years are the shapes of animals that men have brought under subjection. Do you remember the golden calf that Aaron made in the chapter of Exodus? Have men not subjected calves? Are bulls and goats and these other animals that have been made into idols, are they not under the control of men? Is it a way that men tries to put God in a way that we can understand that God has limits and that possibly man really ultimately has control over God? That we know exactly what God is and we know exactly how far God will go. And so Micah makes this image. Again, drawing back to Exodus 32, and it is actually in the study of Micah that I went back to Exodus and looked at this. Why did Aaron make a golden calf, and what shape was this image made in? She's dedicating this money to the Lord, to Yahweh. The word Yahweh is used here. Look back with me in Exodus chapter 32, verses 4 and 5. He took what they had handed him and made it into idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And he said, "This is your God, Israel, which brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to Yahweh, to the Lord." So Aaron, in this way, in the shaping of the calf, was not making it in an image of Baal, who is also the image of a bull. He was not making it in the image of something that was a god from Israel. He's saying, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt, or the God from Egypt. This is the God that brought you out of Egypt. He is saying, we're going to celebrate before Jehovah. So Aaron was trying to give the people of Israel an image, something that they could identify, something that they could quantify about God, to see the limits, the height and breadth and width and depth of Jehovah. And the purpose of the image was to bring it down to where man can understand God. And it's quite likely that this is what Micah's mother was wanting, because she is dedicating this to Yahweh, an attempt of man to try to define God. It's also possible in the book of Exodus where we read, what was the motivation about the construction of this idol in the first place? What had just happened? Remember, Moses went up on the Mount Sinai and was gone for 40 days. And the people began to murmur, saying, what's happened to Moses? Where is he? What's going on? And so they went to Aaron and said, Moses could be dead for all we know. We need something else. We need someone to represent us to God. And so Moses was an intermediary between himself and between God and the people. Do you remember? The people didn't approach God directly. They didn't talk to God directly. They went through Moses. And many times during the wanderings, we read how Moses interceded for the people when they had sinned and when they had murmured and complained or outright rebelled against God. Moses said, please, Father, save these people. Withhold your wrath. And so Moses acted as this intermediary, and it's quite possible the children of Israel were looking for this buffer between them and God. They wanted somebody or something that they could go to that would act as that intermediary, where they could go and they could talk to it, and it would carry their message to God. They didn't want to deal with God directly. Remember when God's had the clouds and his appearance of the lightning and the fire from the top of the mountain, they were afraid. They backed away. So it's quite possible that there they wanted an intermediary between themselves and God. It's quite possible here that Micah, in the shaping of this image, is doing the same thing. He's wanting something that he can direct to that will carry that to Yahweh, that will take that, because he didn't want to deal with God directly. They had, now we continue to read. So he returned the silver to his mother, and she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, which used them to make the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. Now the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as priest. In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Micah was also taking no chances here. He had this image made of the silver that his mother had given him to dedicate it to Yahweh, but it says he also made some household gods. He was showing a polytheistic side here, not wanting to offend any god. Do you remember when Paul talked to the Corinthians on Mars Hill. He was wandering, and they had all of these idols and all of these temples to all the different gods that they worshiped. And they had this idol that was made to the unknown God, because they were so afraid of, well, there's one I forgot. There's somebody, I don't want to offend any God, so I'm going to make this idol dedicated to him. And it's possible that Micah, because of the people that they were living amongst, remember, they were told to drive out all of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, and they didn't. And how these other peoples that occupied the land were polytheistic in that they had multiple gods that they worship. And it looks like this influence has come into the household of Micah, because he builds not only the idol dedicated to Yahweh, but some other household gods, and he brings them in. And he installs one of his sons as priest. And again, it makes the statement, in Israel there was no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. We know that the people from time to time rejected God as their king. In fact, when Samuel eventually anoints Saul, God says, they have rejected me as their king. And now they ask for an earthly king, and that's exactly what I'm going to give them. I'm going to let them reap the rewards of what they have asked, because they have rejected me as their king. And they did as they saw fit. How well has that worked out for you? Do you remember the expression, Dr. Phil, when he's talking with somebody? I kind of enjoy watching some of his episodes, and people are saying, well, I did this and I did this, and this is why I did that, and I was justified in doing. And Dr. Phil will come back and sit and look at him and say, how did that work out for you? How's that working? And the people will admit that it's not working, that the way they're running their lives is not working. That's what happened here. They were trying to do what's right in their own eyes, and how's that working out? It led them to disaster after disaster. And the whole book of Judges is about how people did what was right in their own eyes, and it led to bondage. Just like it leads us today. If we try to direct our own steps, Jeremiah tells us it is not within man to direct his own steps, but the way of man leads to death. This is what the people were doing. This is what Micah did. He tried to set it up in his way, but he wanted to take no chances, and he makes these idols to many gods. Adam and Eve thought that the fruit looked good to eat, didn't they? It was pleasing to the eye. The brothers of Joseph thought that it would be pleasing to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, to get rid of this brother that was just a constant source of irritation to them. Nadab and Abihu thought that it would be pleasing to offer to God a fire that he had not authorized, that they were forbidden to use. King David thought that it would be pleasing to bring Bathsheba to him and to have adultery with her. Judas thought that it would be pleasing to have 30 pieces of silver. How well did that work out for them? What did their eye lead them to? But death and disaster. And that's what the Israelites are doing here. That's what Micah is doing. He's trying to run his life according to his own eye, rather than the will of God. He sets up these gods, he sets up these idols, and he sets up his own priest. He sets up his son. And it says he consecrated his son as priest. He didn't have the authority to do that. We learned in the law of Moses, as the people are coming out, who were supposed to be the priests to the people of Israel, but other than the children of Aaron, the Levite tribe. They were to be the priests, and the high priest was supposed to come in the tribe of Levi. There was no authority to appoint any priest other than from the tribe of Levi. But for whatever reason, Micah felt, I got to have a priest. I need to have a priest. Isn't that the way we do sometimes? We feel like there are certain aspects of God's law that we really need to have. We really need to follow. And so we try to follow them, but we try to find a compromise, a way that works better for us, a way that is more pleasing to our eyes. So we set up our own. I've heard of people that have said that They worship God, they have great use for God, but they've got no use for the church. The church has no place in their lives. And so they're just going to set up their own church. They're going to have their own church. The way it can be directed is the way they please. That's what Micah did here. He sets up his own church, sets up his own priest, and fails to do as God directed. Now, did Micah know what was right? I believe that he did, but let's say he didn't. Let's say he didn't really understand what the priesthood was about and how they were supposed to worship. What is our lesson, our takeaway from today? If Micah didn't know what was right, where does the fault lie? What didn't happen that should have? This is a lesson that speaks to us today. If our children go astray, are we doing what we need to be doing as parents to instruct them, to give them the Word of God, to teach them to dig into Word, to teach them to dig in and learn what messages God has for them in their lives, so that they can accurately follow in God's footsteps and follow the Son of God. And so Micah does what's right in his own eyes. He sets himself up, sets his son up as priest. But then we find a young Levite comes into town from Bethlehem in Judah. He had been living within the clan of Judah. The Levites, they were not given an inheritance in Israel. They were given 48 cities in which they could disperse and live and help serve the needs of the people. But this young Levite, for whatever reason, left Bethlehem, and he's wandering. He's just looking for a place to live. He's not going to one of these 48 cities that had been designated. He's just wandering. Comes upon Micah. And the way he came to Micah's house in the country of Ephraim, Micah said, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm looking for a place to stay." And so Micah reaches out to him and encourages him. And Micah says to him, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes, your food. I'll give you room and board and 10 shekels of silver a year to come and be my priest, to serve me, to serve what my needs are." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons. Then Micah installs the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. I like the King James Version here a little bit better for the word installed. It says, "And Micah consecrated him." And the problem I have with that is, does man have the ability to consecrate anything? Can a sinful man set apart something as holy? Or is the one worshiped have the ability to say what's holy to him? Does God, as the object of our worship and the object of our love and devotion, does he have the right to set the rules as to what is holy to him? Or do we have the right to set the rules and tell God what's holy? That this man is going to be priest. He tried to set apart. He knew, and this is kind of going back to how much did Micah know about what was right. He knew a priest was better than his son as priest. And so he's trying to legitimize, he's trying to set up a religion in his own household that is a little bit better than what he had before. It satisfies his conscience a little bit. And so he installs this priest to come and live with him. And then Micah says, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has come to be my priest." He's bought his priest. He's bought his church. He's bought his religion. He's bought his idols. He's hedged his bets by having all these idols to these other gods. Micah seeks to buy God's favor by adding all the trappings of true worship, but none of his heart. If I say the right things, if I do the right things, if I have the right setting, then God will give me his favor. Do we do the same today? Is our takeaway from this, do we come to church services and punch the clock? Do we come and participate in this program or that program as a way of just doing the minimum? Do we seek to do just what's required? We want to say, the young man that came to Jesus, he said, Lord, what must I do to be saved? He didn't say, Lord, what can I do to be saved? He said, Lord, what must I do? We tend to want to look at the minimum, and that's what Mike is trying to do. He's trying to meet the minimum standard that makes him feel good that God is going to bless him. Now we move into chapter 18. Once again, the writer says, in these days, Israel had no king, describing their failure to honor God, to lift God up as holy and lift up God as their king. In those days, the tribe of Danites was seeking to find a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. Now, again, I don't really like the New International Version translation here because it doesn't really capture the idea. The idea is that the tribe of Dan had been given an inheritance. When all of the tribes of Israel came into Israel, their land was apportioned to them. They were given areas of land that they were to go out and conquer. Dan didn't do it. They went to their area and they said, it's too tough. It's too hard. And so some of the other translations say their inheritance had not fallen to them yet. They hadn't conquered it. They hadn't done the work to possess the land. When God gave them the land of Israel, he said, I'll be with you. I'll help you conquer it. Just follow me. Do what I need to do. They didn't do it. They didn't drive out the inhabitants. They didn't tear down these high places of worship to these idols. And here the Danites didn't take their land because it was too tough. So they started looking for somewhere else that was easier. They wanted some place that they didn't have to fight so hard and battle so hard. And so they start going out to the other tribes of Israel, looking to take part of their inheritance as their own. And so the tribe of Dan is sinning here in that they're not taking what God has given them, but they're trying to steal from their brothers. Remember, Micah stole from his mother. Dan is stealing from the other tribes. And in this particular case, coming into the land of Ephraim, and they're looking to seize a land that they can take as their own because they failed to seize the land that God had given them. So the Danites sent out 5 men leading from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. The men represented all the Danites. They told them, go out and explore the land. How many times have we heard this in the Old Testament? That the children of Israel sent out spies to go check out this land, see if we can do it, see what the land is like, see if we even want to go there. Once again, some spies are sent out to check out the land of Ephraim. So they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned and said, who brought you here? What are you doing here? Why are you here? Perhaps that they recognized his accent. We don't really know that they recognized his voice personally, but perhaps they recognized that he was from the tribe of, lived in the tribe of Judah by his accent. But for whatever reason, they knew he didn't belong in Micah's house. That wasn't where he was supposed to be. And they said, why are you here? What are you doing? He told them what Micah had done for him and said, he has hired me as his priest. I'm his hired gun. I serve Micah. He doesn't say I serve the Lord. He said, I serve Micah. Who do we serve when we sell out to Satan? When we sell out to ourselves, our pleasures, do we say I serve God or do I serve self? This priest was serving himself in that he was looking to the highest bidder, to what was in it for him, rather than what he was to do for God. And they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. Again, here's some people doing a sinful thing, but they want God's blessing to do it. They want God to bless what they're doing in taking part of the land of Ephraim. And so they knew that they needed God's blessing to do it. They wanted God's blessing, again, trying to hedge their bets. They wanted this priest to bless them. He tells them, go in peace, your journey has the Lord's approval. So the 5 men left and went on to Laish, where they saw the people were living in safety like the Sidonians. at peace and secure. Their land lacked nothing. They were prosperous. They lived a long way from the Sidonians, had no relationship with anyone else. This was probably a colony of Sidonians. They were living at peace, far away from Sidon, but yet they were at war with nobody. They had no ruler. They had no enemies. They were just living in peace in the land. Now, they were specifically mentioned to be driven out at the beginning of the conquest of Israel. They were supposed to be driven out, but they weren't. But at this particular time, this colony was living in peace. They weren't at war with anyone. They probably didn't even have an army because there wasn't a need for it at that time. These spies come out and they say, come back and give this report. They say, the Danites said, how did you find things? Come on, let's attack them. We've seen the land, it's very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate. Let's go over it, let's take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people in a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatsoever. Isn't that what God wanted to hear from the 12 spies that were sent out into the land originally? That what are we waiting for? The land has nothing nothing else that we need. God is going to give it to us. Let's go get it. What are we waiting for? That's what God wanted to hear from the 12 spies, and yet that's what we hear from the 5 spies from the tribe of Dan, taking a land that was not their own. But that's the kind of statement of faith that God wanted from the original spies. That's the statement of faith, I believe, that Joshua and Caleb gave when they said, let's go take the land. We can do it. God will give the land to us. But yet, that's not what happens. The 5 men who spied out the land said to their fellow Danites, do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, has some household gods, an overlaid image with silver? Now you know what to do. And so they go into the house of Micah. Evidently Micah is not there at the time. And they take the silver idol, they take the household idols that he made, they take these other gods, they take the silver ephod that he made, which is supposed to be the garment that the priest would wear in sacrifices and holy services. They take all of these things and they leave. The priest they took with him. First, the priest confronts him and says, what are you doing here? Well, they're packing up all the gold and silver. I don't know what he was expecting them to answer when they're packing up everything. And they talk to him and they say, what are you doing being the priest of one man? Come and be the priest of a whole tribe. Isn't that better? Isn't that more status to be a priest over a tribe than a priest over one family? And so the priest saw that it was good to do this, and he goes with them. Again, a man following what his eyes tell him instead of what the Lord has said. And so he goes with them and they leave. The priest's concern was not for the sacred things. It was not for his position or what he was to do. He was looking for better opportunity. He was looking for more money. And some terms from television show, he was moving on up. He was getting a better life for himself. No loyalty to God, no loyalty to Micah. Now, the people of the Danites, when they had done this, they took everything. It says they put their treasures up in front, they put their women and children in front, and the army stayed in back. Now, I kind of thought, well, that's kind of weird. They're putting them at risk. Why did the army stay in back? Well, the reason the army stayed in back is they knew that Micah was going to come looking for them. They knew that they needed to be in back because they were expecting a pursuit, which Micah did. He comes after them, and they come some distance. The men from Micah overtook them, and they shouted to them. And they said to Micah, what's the matter? Why have you called out to fight? Why have you brought all this army? Kind of like when we get stopped by a policeman and say, well, officer, what did I do? They were saying, well, why are you coming out to fight? Why are you here? And he tells them, you took the gods that I made. He's claiming to be the creator of the gods. Is that really the way it's supposed to be? Are we the creation? Are we the creator? He says, you took the gods that I made, and my priest, not the Lord's priest, not the things that are holy to God. You took my stuff, my priest. He is claiming that you took what I set up, what I wanted for my religion. He isn't looking to honor God in this. He's looking to protect his investment. And that's exactly what he did. The Danites said, don't argue with us, or some of these men might get angry and attack you, and you and your family will lose your lives. So the Danites went on their way, and Micah, seeing they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. It's kind of funny. They tell Micah, get out of my face, or my men might attack you and kill you and your family. How tough are they? They took a town that had no army, that was at peace with everyone. They came into the tribe of Israel to steal land from their own brethren, and now they have a tough face in front of Micah. You go home or we're going to kill you and your family. They couldn't fight the fight that God had given them. They chose to fight where it was easier, where it was something that they thought they could accomplish. And so they took what Micah had made and his priests and went to Laish, and a people at peace and secure. They attacked them. There was no one to rescue them. I like this expression. There was no one to rescue the Sidonians because they were so far away from Sidon. They were so far away from their allies. What's the story for us today? What's our take-home message for today is, what happens when we get so far away from God? When we get so far away from God's people. When, it's especially difficult in a time like this with COVID that so many of us don't get to go and be in fellowship and hug on and love our brethren. When we get far away, isn't it easier for Satan to attack us? Isn't it easier for temptation to come into our life and take hold? They got so far away that there was no one to rescue them. What about us? Can we, in this very difficult time, get so far away from God that there be no one to rescue us? That's why we need to stay connected. That's why we need to stay in touch with one another. That's what we need to fellowship, to check on our brothers and sisters who are not able to come and to worship with us, to love one another even though we can't be together the way we want to be. There's protection in numbers, and that applies to the house of God. That's why God doesn't want us to forsake the assembly of ourselves together, but all the more as we see the day approaching. Micah's sin, we read, they continued to use the idol of Micah that Micah had made, and all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. Micah's individual sin had now become the sin of a tribe. This is the first time we read in the Old Testament where idolatry, which had been an individual sin up to that point, now became an official religion. It became an official religion of the tribe of Dan, and then it will spread throughout Israel. So Micah's sin that started as an individual has now spread to the nation. And now what we see is what started by failing to drive out the inhabitants of Canaan, failing to take the land that they had been given, failing to worship God in the way that God wanted to be worshiped, failing to honor God as king, is now leading to the downfall of the nation. I hope our lesson today has been one that causes you to think about your relationship with God, that you're motivated to stay close to God because that's where your source of deliverance and strength is. May God bless you.